Welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the City of Kettering Planning Commission for February 3rd, 2025. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Miami Valley Cable Council for televising and taping tonight's meeting for rebroadcast on Channel 6 and streaming live over the internet at mvcc.net. It will also be recorded and available for later viewing on mvcc.net. Since this meeting is both audio and videotape to form a complete record for possible appeal to City Council and/or the courts, it is important that anyone who wishes to address the Commission will need to come to the lectern to speak into the microphone and give their name and address for the record. The Planning Commission is a volunteer, independent body appointed by Council, whose mission is to hear all bodies involved and subsequently make a motion to approve, deny, continue, or recommend the application. All action by the Commission can be appealed to the City Council. This time I'd like to introduce members of the Planning Commission. On my left, Ken Lackey, Assistant Secretary. Carol Fisher, who typically sits next to Ken, has an excused absence this evening. She is the Secretary. Typically on my left would be Connie Gall, our Recording Secretary. She also has an excused absence. I'm Don Rethman, the Chair. On my right is Troy Urbis, Vice Chair. And on his right is Ray Waskey, Commissioner. Member of staff present here this evening is Ryan Homsey, City Planner. First item on the agenda this evening is the appointment of officers for 2025. Mr. Waskey, I believe you have a motion for us?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do. I would like to make the following motion: appointment of personnel or officers for the Planning Commission for 2025. For Chairman, Troy Urbis. Vice Chairman, Ray Waskey. For Secretary, Carol Fisher. For Assistant Secretary, Ken Lackey. And Planning Commission member, Don Rethman.
All right. Any discussion on that proposed slate of officers? Seeing as not, do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Waskey,
Yes?
Mr. Urbis,
Yes.
Mr. Lackey,
Yes.
and Mr. Rethman.
Yes. All right. So with that, then, we're going to do a bit of a shuffle here.
Cool. All right. Looks like we have everybody in the new assigned seats for 2025. So, first of all, Don, I want to thank you for your leadership the past year in 2024. Did a wonderful job leading us here and through our cases. And I want to thank the other members of the committee as well, Ray taking over the vice chair position, and Ken taking over assistant secretary. So glad to be here, and I'm honored to serve the city of Kettering. So thank you again, Don. All right, with that, move on to old business. Looking for approval of the minutes of December 16th, 2024. Do I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second?
Mr. Holmesy, call the roll, please.
Mr. Rethman,
Yes.
Mr. Waskey,
Yes.
Mr. Lackey,
Yes.
and Mr. Urbis.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Moving on now to new business. We have a zoning code text amendment relating to pattern district setback requirements. This will be PC case -25-002, which I believe this is also a public hearing. So I believe we'll begin with staff report.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a very straightforward and minor request. It deals with Section 1141.06 of the Planning and Zoning Code, which is the section of the code that establishes the items such as maximum height and minimum setbacks for the suburban development pattern district. And this proposed amendment will really just modify the setback requirements for that pattern district. On the screen now is the table contained in section 1141.06.4, and these are the required setbacks for that pattern district: front yard 25 feet, side yard, street side yard, and rear yard setback. The proposed change would not really change these setback requirements if you have a new building being proposed, but it's really more intended to, if you have a structure that's been vacant for 24 months or more, if you reuse the building, you have to bring it into compliance with today's setback requirements, which, if you have an existing building that sits too close to the property line, that pretty much forces you to demolish part or all of the building. So this amendment would really add a couple sections to the setback requirements for the side and rear yards that essentially says if an existing side or rear yard is less than the minimum requirement, what's there is considered conforming. Now, if you tear the building down and want to build a new one, you have to meet the minimum setbacks as they're listed in the table. So on the screen now, those sections in red in the table, that's the text that allows existing setbacks to be considered conforming, and then the notes at the bottom that would say that really, those sections really say once the structures are demolished or relocated, you have to meet the minimum requirement. So just to give a couple examples of why we're proposing this amendment. On the screen now, this building is occupied. It's Bigger Road Veterinarian over on Bigger Road. It's in the suburban pattern district. It's a perfectly fine building. But if it were to become vacant for any reason for a couple of years, the side yard setback violates the minimum requirement, which the minimum requirement is 10 feet. So if it were to stay vacant for 2 years or more, they would essentially have to tear the building down to reuse it, but that really isn't best planning practice. So what we're really trying to do is to more easily permit the reuse of existing viable buildings that may not meet the minimum side or rear yard setback requirements. And it's intended to prevent situations where someone is forced to partially or fully demolish a structure that can otherwise be reused. And that has come up a few times. One example is the former Lincoln Park Dental, corner of Lincoln Park and Far Hills. That building sits about 28 feet from the back property line. The requirement is 40 feet, and it sits closer than 10 feet to the northern side lot line. But there's enough room to meet the buffer yard requirements. The building itself, it needs a decent amount of work to bring it up to today's code, but it is possible to reuse the building. But the way the code is written today, they would have to tear down part of the building to reuse and it just doesn't it's not good planning practice. So, the intention is to prevent that from happening. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but staff does have a recommendation.
Questions from the commission?
Seems like a good change.
Yep. I think it makes good sense. So if you want to bypass the new code, do you just say we want to do this based on what? What specifically would we say to the owner of the building?
If they wanted to reuse it,
Yeah.
you have to meet the 40-foot rear yard setback requirement. If you don't, you can try to apply for a variance, but that's a tricky process because you have to prove it's impossible to use the property without the variance, and it's not. You just have to tear down the building or part of the building to reuse it. So there's not really an avenue other than a variance to allow reuse of some of these buildings that have been empty for a while.
How many cases have come up before the city like this?
Well, most of the time the buildings are really not super viable, but there's a few examples I can give you. The former Van Buren Tap Room up at the Wilmington Smithville split. Technically, that building sits like on the property line. Now, there's all kinds of other issues with that property that make it hard to reuse. But if someone were to come in and say, I'm going to bring everything else into compliance except this setback issue, they would still have to tear down part of the building. And there's a Lincoln Park Dental. Those are the two big ones that I can think of off the top of my head. So we haven't had a ton, but for the people that own the properties and have a plan to reuse them, even just one is a really big deal. And it doesn't make good planning sense to keep that as the policy of the city. in our opinion.
Okay, I was just wondering how many times we've run into this situation.
It's not something you deal with every week, but it comes up enough that we wanted to proceed with this zoning code amendment.
Okay.
So 3-4 times probably since I've been here it's come up.
Okay. Thank you.
No questions. I think it's a good idea.
No, it seems to make sense to me and kind of clean it up and be friendly to people trying to help us out here. So, all right. Next, do we go to the staff recommendation before we go to the public hearing? Public hearing first? All right. Since this is a public hearing, if there's anyone in the room today that would like to come and speak in front of the Planning Commission, please do so at this time. State your name and address, and we will hear your concerns. Noting that there is no one in the audience today, I'm assuming we will have no comments on that. So with that, I believe we would close the public hearing portion of this.
I move that we close the public hearing.
Second.
All right, call the roll, Mr. Homsey, please.
Okay. Sorry, All right, sorry. Mr. Rethman,
Yes.
Mr. Lackey,
Yes.
Mr. Waskey,
Yeah.
and Mr. Urbis.
Yes. All right, now that the public hearing is closed, I believe we can go to staff recommendation. We're keeping you busy tonight, Mr. Homsey.
Yeah. The staff recommendation is pretty straightforward. It's a simple one. That the applicant's request for a recommendation to City Council for approval of the zoning code text amendments be approved.
Okay, with that, do we have a motion on this?
I have a motion, Mr. Chair.
All right, go ahead.
I have a zoning code update which is a zoning code text amendment. Whereas an application has been received from Tom Robillard, Director of Planning and Development, City of Kettering, Ohio, requesting approval of a zoning code text amendment to amend selected portions of the City of Kettering zoning code. And whereas the Planning Commission has reviewed the facts surrounding this request, including an oral and written report by city staff, which is incorporated herein, and held a hearing on February 3rd, 2025. And whereas this request constitutes approval of a recommendation to Kettering City Council to amend selected portions of the City of Kettering zoning code as presented by staff within their staff report and oral presentation. And whereas the Planning Commission adopts the findings of fact presented by staff in their staff report, which is incorporated into this motion, I move that the applicant's request for a recommendation to City Council for approval of a zoning code text amendment to the City of Kettering zoning code be approved. That concludes my motion.
Thank you, Mr. Rethman. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second. So, Mr. Homsey, call the roll, please.
Mr. Rethman,
Yes.
Mr. Waskey,
Yes.
Mr. Lackey,
Yes.
and Mr. Urbis.
Yes. All right, motion so approved. All right, moving on down into new business, audience participation, which don't have anybody here today, so I assume we'll move past that. Move on down to other business. Mr. Homsey, anything on signing of plats today?
Yes, we have one plat to be signed up here.
Okay. Take care of that. Anything on communications and reports from city staff?
Yeah, I just want to give a quick update on the comprehensive plan. We had our first steering committee meeting a couple weeks ago. It went very well. The consultant after the fact said that we had a very involved group who had a lot of good things to say, so we might end up having one or two more steering committee meetings than we initially planned, which is good. We had sent the stakeholder emails out a couple of weeks ago, and we've had several people sign up for the interviews that our consultant is having. So that's going well. We'll be sending another email reminding our stakeholders sometime this week or next week. And staff continues to work with a consultant on data collection. One of those is a business list of about 100 plus or minus local businesses that we're going to send an email out so our consultant can do a business survey. And then in terms of the research going on. We're finishing up the existing land use research, and we're starting to get more into the transportation component of the plan, which I'm sure there'll be a lot of comments about that throughout the process. We haven't had our first official public meeting yet, but that will be coming up, I believe, in early March, if I remember correctly. So,
Okay, very good. Appreciate the update on that. I did participate in that meeting as well as Mr. Rethman did, and thought it was very engaging. Thought you have a great firm helping us and good audience participation. So look forward to the process continue here in 2025. So thank you very much. Okay, any other communication reports?
I don't have anything else.
All right, anything from the Planning Commission comments?
Go.
All right, well, with that being said, looks like we are ready to adjourn. So at 7:16, I officially call the Planning Commission meeting of February 3rd, 2025 closed. Thank you very much.